Hello and welcome back to another episode of Cyber Voices, the official podcast of the Australian Information Security Association, otherwise known as AISA. I'm your host, as always, David Willett, and it is my pleasure to have you with us as we explore the diverse voices of the Australian cyber industry. Welcome back to Cyber Voices, coming to you live from Melbourne CyberCon 2025, or should I say Australia's CyberCon. We are sitting here on the expo floor in our little podcasting fishbowl. Anyone who's come to CyberCon will know you've probably walked past and seen me. I'm joined today by a return guest. So the fabulous gentleman sitting across from me did come last year, and quite a familiar face at CyberCon, I would say. From Thales Cyber, it's Jason Plumridge. How are you, Jason?
I'm good, David. Thank you, and thanks for having me again, mate.
Yeah, welcome back. We must have done something right if you wanted to come and chat to us again.
I did. I was actually impressed I got the offer to come back again and have another chat. Different topic, but yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, very excited to see your name on the agenda again. You've always got some really interesting insights to share, which is cool. And so you've just come from doing a presentation. And I was just saying to you before we record, one of the things I love about doing this here at CyberCon is it's a great way to continue the CyberCon thought leadership, and just for people, because it's so impossible to get around and see every single thing that happens at this event.
It's impossible. You're right.
And I know there are probably people who'll be kicking themselves they didn't get to see you. And you did a great talk just now on the growing threats posed by foreign intelligence entities. And the critical role that robust physical and personal security controls play in mitigating these risks. Whew. Yeah. Now, let's break that down.
Let's
what was it all about?
It was it was a good session, actually. I got more than I expected. We had some standing room, so that was all right. So, in the current geopolitical environment across the globe, foreign intelligence entities, whether they're state sponsored or not, is a growing problem. Even commercial data is being stolen. It doesn't necessarily need to be another country. So what I decided to do was break that down for cyber professionals. So it's a little bit more on the physical and personnel security side than it is the IT side. Right. But it seems like it was well received. So we break that down.
Right. So we're diving into physical security and how that relates to cyber. Is that right?
Well, we're more diving into how foreign intelligence operatives would target your staff at your organisation with their objective to get your data out is the thing. So we go through things like I spoke about recruitment. How do they recruit? How do they identify their individuals? What's their target? Their target might be your blueprints for a new technology. It might be personally identifiable information, and there is a cyber element to that. Some of the technology they're using for it is still the standard malware, phishing, social engineering. But then you get the relationship people side, right, where they actually actively look for somebody in the organisation that already has access, so they've already got the keys to the city. That, to foster a relationship with, gain their trust, and then get them to give them the information. So it's much harder to defend when you've got an insider threat, which is the basis of the problem, than it is to defend against an external one.
Yeah. So are we talking about more sort of like in-your-face social engineering here? What's an example?
So there's plenty of examples publicly. I spoke about a Russian guy who got into Tesla. There was a Chinese national that stole some code out of Google and sold it. So there is a number of different elements to it, but it's really around finding an identified target that has access to the information you're after, and then developing that relationship with that particular person, gaining their trust, isolating them from the rest of the organisation, and then the push comes to give them the data. Now, there could be a number of reasons they target that particular person. It could be that they've had, we spend an inordinate amount of time on social media and things pushing our lives onto the agenda. That's pretty easy targeting for a foreign intelligence operative. They use that against you, right? Mm-hmm. So if you've got a gambling problem, you might be down on your luck. You might have had some sort of traumatic event. They'll use that. They'll use that as a means to gain your trust, and then ultimately somebody may give them the information they're after, or at least give them the credentials to do so.
Yeah, and I'm guessing this usually winds up in exploiting a vulnerability in a human being as opposed to in a
Correct.
software system. Because I think I remember the Tesla example. I think they were blackmailing that individual,
Correct.
and
Yeah.
it was given a USB or something to go and plug in and basically bring everything down or steal a whole bunch of stuff. And I think that guy basically at the last minute, like
Yeah.
went to the company and said, "This is
This is
happening."
what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And sometimes they don't actually know that they're being targeted in that way. They think it's a genuine relationship, right? Yeah, they've tried all sorts of methods. You've seen the stuff around deep fakes where North Korean operatives had deep fakes, did formal interviews for the job, got the job,
Mhm.
during the COVID times remote. So they're very smart. They're very organized. It's just like a business for them. And, we've got to be careful. Now, it's not just North Korea and China and Russia, the usual ones that come out in the media.
Mhm.
Every country is doing this across the globe, right? So it's just part of the ethos, I guess. But trying to identify that for an IT person or a HR manager, you're looking at, have they changed their behavior? Are they living beyond their means, right? How would
Mhm.
they afford that, Ford Mustang? I tell a story about a mate of mine who turned up my driveway one time with a new Ford Mustang convertible, and I'm a Holden guy, right? So that got a bit of a laugh, which was funny. But so he turns up in that, and I go, oh, how does that work? Now, it could have been an FI, but it
Mhm.
wasn't in this case. He has a normal job, quite well-paying job, but he also day trades, which
Mhm.
we didn't know, right? So that was how he was making his money. He turns up with a nice
Yeah.
car, right? So you got to be careful. It doesn't necessarily always mean there's a foreign intelligence threat, but those behaviours where they change it, they become isolationists, they start early, leave late, try and access stuff that they shouldn't access. You might have to, your security operations center needs to start looking at any anomaly that
Mm.
might indicate that there's something wrong.
Yeah, because it this is an interesting Pandora's box to open, I think, for some people,
Yeah.
because whereas in cyber circles, we're looking at digital behavior, but there's almost a psychology element to this because, hey, someone shows up with a new Ford Mustang. They don't even need to be a day trade. Some people will save up money for
Correct.
something that they really, really, really
And
want.
and you can't accuse them of anything, right? So
Yeah.
finding the evidence on that is another issue, right? Gambling debts is a classic to be targeted, right? Because they're down on their luck, so it's an easier sell, right? But these people are not, it's not usually coercion that happens. In some cases, it might be, but it's more building that relationship, getting that trust, and I'm doing something I shouldn't do, but it's all right. It's
Mm.
Joe,
That's right.
right?
And we're probably this kind of level of, foreign intelligence coercion or interference.
Mhm.
We hear all about like foreign interference and
Yep.
influence programs and all that kind of stuff. I work in education where that plays in quite a bit as well. I imagine that this is targeting particular industries and sectors, or more relevant. I am imagining in things like the energy sector or utilities and stuff like that. Would that be right?
Yeah, correct. Government gets targeted a lot. Critical infrastructure is getting targeted a lot. Anybody that's got sensitive information, large swathes of it, especially technology companies, blueprints for stuff, even military-related companies, right? They've got blueprints for new vehicles, etc. So, they've got to have an objective, and they'll do a proper strategy. Like, this is not a short-term thing. It's a
Mhm.
long-term game, 3 to 5 years, even more. Well, they'll get into that organization, or they'll, get into the relationship with the person that has the information, and keep building until they get their objective. Now, that recruitment cycle, they may recruit them formally, and then it becomes an ongoing relationship for payment or otherwise, right through to, termination of that relationship, either because, the employee gets arrested for providing secrets, they get arrested as a known operative or something like that. So, yeah, there is a number of different elements to it.
So, what are the strategies you're advising on in terms of managing this then, right? 'Cause you talked a little bit there about monitoring existing stuff, but I mean, this would be like almost like an insider threat program. And,
It
and I
is.
imagine probably starts right from the moment of recruitment.
Yeah.
What do you advise on in this space?
Look, there's a lot of controls that need to
Mm.
go in place, both personnel and physical. So at a physical level, we're still talking about, electronic access systems and cards, maybe with a PIN code attached to it, give the MFA from a physical perspective. Keeping your data separated, keeping it classified, and those two systems not being able to talk to each other, managing, the admin, local admin, etc. All those things. At a personal level, though, it's about understanding who that employee is, or who that contractor is, or who that outsourcer is, and what are their relationships? Are they linked to somebody else that you don't know about? So this whole third party piece is starting to come up. And things like when you're going overseas on business trips, taking burner laptops, burner phones. There's some places in the world where they've got the right to hold you and detain you until such time as you open a laptop. Now, if you're a commercial organisation and you've got blueprints or something or other else on that laptop, that's not something you want to get into an overseas location. So there's lots of controls like that.
Yeah, and I kind of saw in some of the summary of your talk as well. There's also continuous personal monitoring. This is probably the part I'm interested in. It's kind of piqued my interest is monitoring the human being aspect, right? We've all had to do a background check before. Some people do security clearances, all that kind of stuff, right? And usually that's just to make sure that the person is of good character.
Yep, correct.
Which there can be different red flags for. I know personally, like the first time I ever got someone called me to say someone I was recruiting was like, oh, they had like a DUI charge 2 years ago. Do you still want to go ahead? And I'm like, I guess so. Like, I mean, that sounds like a bit of a stupid mistake on their behalf, but I don't know if I should hold that against them.
I wouldn't hold them against
for
DUI.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess it also depends on the role and what kind of the risks that it could pose based on whatever the the red flag is.
So there'll be a number of different red flags, though. Like I said, the living beyond your means, their actual behaviour at work. These things will be noticed by managers, and they could be just because of a traumatic event, but they could also indicate there's some other issue. And you can't just go and monitor everybody, right? There's privacy laws, there's a whole bunch of stuff, but if you've got enough evidence to suggest there's something not right, then it might be appropriate that you monitor their email, or you might be appropriate that you monitor what they're downloading, especially if you've got someone who's resigned, as another classic example, or they're threatening to resign. You might put those controls in place just to protect the organisation and go, all right, what's this person actually doing? So it's those sort of things. It's not a blanket monitoring everybody. There's no AI engine that's monitoring everybody's email and comms and, like, what is it, 1984 from George Orwell? It's not that.
Yeah.
But, under specific circumstances, for specific reasons, within legal frameworks and privacy frameworks, that might be appropriate.
Yeah, and I can imagine that would usually be baked into policy around workplace monitoring and all that. If there, and there'd probably, I guess there'd probably need to be some kind of agreement that it's not just, say, the CISO who decides someone needs to be monitored. It would probably need to be an agreement between like the CISO and someone from like head of HR and maybe a risk officer or something along those lines.
You're absolutely right. It's got to be baked in policy. It's got to be acknowledged by the staff member through either their induction process, their use of systems. We all have for IT systems. You acknowledge that the data and the system is provided by the company, and that it'll be monitored if necessary. All those are standard clauses. Absolutely, you need to get HR involved because there's legal issues. You might need to get the legal officer involved so that a decision can be made from a group, probably, the CEO, chief risk, maybe chief legal, HR at a minimum, and they would direct the CISO to make the appropriate changes to monitor that within bounds.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's I think that's probably an interesting balance that a lot of people would have to make. It's continuous personnel monitoring as well as an interesting one too. Most places require you to do a very simple police background check when you start employment, and you can probably work for that place for 20 years and never have to go through that again. I've worked some places recently where that actually has to be refreshed every 2 years. Are you seeing that become more commonplace, or how does that continuous monitoring kind of work in that space, especially in terms of determining a person is still of good character from that point in time when you hire them?
Look, my background, I'm ex-New South Wales Police, so I've got that
of course
background. So, we are seeing a bit more of that, especially with security cleared people, especially with critical infrastructure providers, where you are redoing a criminal history check in 5 years, because a lot can change in that time, right? Now, you won't be held, you'll certainly be held accountable for whatever, you've done, but that doesn't necessarily mean that'll impact your employment, right? But if you have a clean slate and then something happens, you get a couple of DUI charges or whatever, there's some reason for it, does that necessarily make them a bad employee? No, it doesn't, right? So we are starting to see a little bit more organisations doing that. On the flip side, there are some that just don't, right? They haven't done another criminal history check for 30 years. And if there's no reason for that company to do that, then that might be fine. don't rely on just verbal or reference checks, because that's probably their best mate telling them how good they are. You need to go a little bit deeper, especially for management level positions, positions of influence, or where you've got significant access to lots of data, like your CIO, like your CISO. You might need to go and look at credit checks, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And with their permission, of course, because money related issues can be part of the problem.
Has that been done? People like employers doing credit checks on staff?
Some do for financial related delegations. Absolutely, it's not. I wouldn't say it's commonplace, but in 10% of organisations where it's appropriate for those positions of influence, not everybody. If you don't have access to pay out financial related information and manipulate that part of it, then there's probably no need, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you have the ability to, and this is why segregation of duties is so important from that perspective. So you may do it for those CFOs and financial officers if they're transitioning millions of dollars at a time.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, and you mentioned SOCI as well, and that kind of reminded me where I'd heard that the requirement for a lot of places to have to continuously do it every. So I think it's usually like every 2 years or so, depending. But it's again, I think it's a risk based kind of approach. It's not everyone in an organization. Like if you are an operator of a critical infrastructure asset, then I think generally there is depending on what role you hold or what level of access you may have to critical systems of that asset, then you need to be checked.
No, you're absolutely right, David. You've got to have a justifiable basis and reason for doing any inquiry like that in an employee. There is still a right to privacy, as there should be, quite rightly. But, the option is there to be able to do it with agreement or, at least with some management level resource and maybe some legal advice as well to be able to do that if such happens, right? Especially if you suspect an FI interference, foreign interference.
Yeah. So in your talk today, did you dive into any real world examples? I know we touched very generally on some of them before, but
I had one slide that had some publicly accessible information on it.
I know we talked about a few of them before, but is there one that you think can really kind of, just for like our listeners, that can really kind of drive home this threat and how real it is?
There was one recently. I didn't have this on my slide, but there was one recently about a year ago. I think it was a Russian couple here in Australia that got identified by ASIO and they were supplying information. So it happens even here. There's the recent ASIO report from Mike Burgess, the Director General of the ASIO. They put out a report, which is the first one I understand for this level of data. But the cost of FI in Australia for 2023-24 was like $12.5 billion, and that was probably underestimated because half of it probably doesn't get reported. A lot doesn't get found out. So it's a significant problem.
Yeah, I think I remember the Russian couple that you were referring to there. That was big news when it happened, I believe. Yeah. How did the audience take it? Did you get any light bulb moments, any curly questions that kind of helped gauge how people are thinking about this?
Yeah, look, I did get a couple. I had to stay back for about 10 minutes and answer a whole bunch of questions from different people, ranging from students through to other organisations that are responsible for security. Yeah, there was some. I got stumped by one question, but I don't think I understood the question when we later discussed it. It was something that I hadn't picked up on the fly.
Oh, right.
But I won't mention that one here. But it's good that they're thinking about it. A lot of IT people, especially at ASIS, majority is IT related. They don't think about the physical and the personnel because that's the realm of the CSO, the Chief Security Officer, and security officers, as opposed to CISO or IT people. So I think they need to have an understanding of it though, because they're the ones that are being asked to go and look for those anomalies in SOC records and logs and things like that. And you need to build security culture around this topic, right? You need to train your staff. You need to make sure they understand what might be the indicators and know where to report it with no problem to them.
Yeah, it's kind of got me thinking about what is that Venn diagram of sorts between physical security, personnel security, and cyber security. I mean,
yeah, it is a Venn diagram, really. Yeah.
I mean, and even in my position as a CISO, it's not purely what you're talking about, right? Like I'm thinking more about, again, like I said at the beginning, that digital behavior, what they're actually doing online, what emails they're getting, what websites they're visiting, all that kind of stuff. So what do you say to CISOs out there that maybe think that this is not their responsibility? They think, because a lot of CISOs will push back on physical security being in their remit.
It's part of my role, but I understand it's not part of every CISO's role.
Yeah.
But you are linked to it. right?
Of course.
You're in charge of IT security for the organization. You hold the data sets. You might not be the data owner. And there's always arguments with size over who owns the data. But, ultimately, if you're requested for whatever reason, justifiable to look at the tracking and activity of a staff member, you may not even know why. It may not even be released. They think there's some sort of foreign intelligence problem. It may just be, look, we've got this particular person. We need this monitored. Don't ask questions. That may be it. But understand you're part of that. You're part of that circle of, I guess, evidential gathering. And you're the one that has access to the systems to go and look at those logs, find those anomalies, to either support or reject the hypothesis on whether we've got a problem or we don't.
Yeah, you need to be there and ready to support it. But I think also we've got access, like you said, we've got access to that information and intelligence that's probably really important to the chief security officers and people who may be responsible for, foreign interference programs and all that kind of stuff as well. There is maybe not an ultimate responsibility, but there's definitely an accountability there for sure.
I don't think it's an ultimate responsibility. That definitely sits with the CSO. And, under PSPF, et cetera, the CSO is kind of responsible for all security, even IT in general terms. So, I think it's a conglomeration of both the CISO, the CSO, and other teams to monitor these controls, both on a physical and an IT level.
Okay. And I guess final question before I let you get out there and enjoy the rest of CyberCon and what it has to offer. We're very lucky you're doing this. It's just after lunchtime on day one, so there's so much CyberCon ahead. But what advice do you have for any organization out there that is maybe feeling they need to start taking this threat a little bit more seriously? They know they've got a problem. They know they're not really nailing it. What advice do you give to them to start?
I would probably split up a little bit. From a data perspective, know where your data is, know what its classification is, know how important it is, and prioritize the controls to secure that data. That's really what you're holding. From a FI perspective, look at the insider threat, right? It's a lot harder for them to come in external than it is to manipulate somebody that's already inside and already has access to those systems and data.
Yeah.
So, understand your insider threat program, train them, do the security cultural training, because that's really, really important, right? Staff need to know what might be an indicator. They need to know how to report it, and that's really the basis of it for me. Understand that threat profile. We do it for IT all the time, right? We look at our external defenses, we look at our internal defenses, we prioritize it, we understand where our data is and who's got access to it, or we should. This is no different, right? This is just the personnel side of things. Understand who your people are, what they're involved in, what they have access to. One of the things I set up there earlier was anybody. And you can go and search LinkedIn and you'll still find people putting their Commonwealth security clearance on
That's been
record,
a big,
right?
That's even made it into the news lately.
It has. And it's a massive problem. And in my view, and I'll reiterate what Mike Burgess said, they shouldn't have security clearance if they're doing that, right?
Yeah.
So my advice to anybody that does have out there, get it off your LinkedIn profile and your CVs.
It's not bragging rights.
It's not. It's just not, right? It's just not. It's a responsibility, and you need to understand that you have that responsibility.
Yeah.
Right.
Part of that responsibility is to be quiet about the fact that you have that responsibility.
Absolutely. Totally agree. But you'd be surprised how much it happens. Right?
Yeah.
So have a look. Go and search your staff on LinkedIn and see what comes up. I guarantee you at least one will have their clearance.
Yeah. It's several months before that kind of came out in the news. I saw people complaining about it on LinkedIn that they could see people were doing that. So yeah, big red flag. Very big red flag.
Huge red flag. Yeah.
Well, Jason, thank you so much. You always bring really fabulous topics to CyberCon, challenge us a little bit in ways that maybe in areas that we had not thought were completely related to our day jobs. But this has been something we could probably unpack what is a very nuanced topic for a good couple of hours here if we had the time. But I think this has definitely given myself and our listeners something interesting to think about. So
yeah, great. Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for sharing your voice with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Cyber Voices. Our music is by Sanar Garut, our show artwork is by Studio Quarantine, and we record our show at This Is a Studio in Pran, Melbourne, part of Pot Plant Productions. please make sure you follow the show on your podcast platform of choice and leave us a 5-star review. This will help others find the show. Also, please follow the association on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you want to add your voice to our ever-growing chorus of diverse cyber voices, have questions, feedback, or would like to be a sponsor, you can do so by emailing us at cybervoices@aisa.org.au. That's cybervoices@aisa.org.au. Are you an ASA member? If not, you should consider joining our network of over 12,000 members across Australia. An ASA membership can open doors, build professional networks, create lifetime friendships, and offer exclusive training, events, and other perks. Become a member today by heading to our website at asa.org.au. That is all for today. I hope you will join us again next time on Cyber Voices.